When my brother banned me from Dad's birthday party, he didn't even flinch. "You don't belong here, Emma," he said, buttoning his crisp blue shirt as if I were some unpaid intern who'd wandered into the wrong meeting. "Dad doesn't need failures at his table." His words were cold measured and final. And I, like a fool, stood there holding the cake I'd baked with my own hands, chocolate layers stacked high, the same recipe Mom used to make when we were kids. The frosting had started to melt in the afternoon sun. It was supposed to be a surprise. Instead, it became proof of how far I'd fallen from the family line. I left before my anger could show. The door shut behind me with that quiet, polite click that rich people use to end conversations without having to raise their voices. The scent of polished wood and expensive cologne followed me out like a ghost. Outside, the air in Beacon Hill was colder than I remembered. The cobblestones under my heels were slick with drizzle, and I thought stupidly of the time Dad once told me that success was about showing up clean, calm, and prepared. I had shown up, just not in the way he wanted. It had been 3 years since I left Boston, and the Carter family hadn't forgiven me for it. Not because I'd done something terrible, but because I'd done something unforgivable in their world. I'd dropped out of Harvard Business School to build something of my own. I remember the look on my father's face when I told him. That sharp, cutting disappointment. "You're walking away from a legacy," he said. "No," I answered, my voice trembling. "I'm trying to build one." But in this house, legacies weren't built. They were inherited. By the time I reached the bottom of the hill, the drizzle had turned to rain. I ducked under the awning of a closed cafe, staring at the cake box in my hands. The frosting had slid to one side, smearing against the cardboard, like the last trace of pride I had left. I wanted to throw it away, but I couldn't. Something in me refused to let go of that small, stupid symbol of love, the kind that isn't recognized in wills or bank accounts. That's when I remembered something Dad used to say when I was little, back before money became the family's religion. "If you want to get rich, Emma, stop thinking like a poor person." Back then I didn't understand. I thought he meant stop worrying about bills or about making mistakes. But now I saw it differently. Poor thinking wasn't about lack of money, it was about fear. Fear of being different, of being laughed at, of stepping outside the script. I took a deep breath and looked up at the glowing windows of my father's mansion. Inside, I could almost hear them: Dad, with his booming laugh, Mom smiling tightly beside him, Lucas clinking glasses with the guests from the firm. They would be eating steak, drinking vintage wine, and telling stories about how Emma never really understood business. Let them. I turned away, opened the cake box, and sliced a piece for myself with the plastic fork I'd grabbed from a deli earlier. It was slightly soggy but sweet. As I ate, the city lights flickered one by one, glowing gold against the gray sky. It was a small reminder: light always finds its way back. I didn't have money. I didn't have company yet. But I had something more dangerous: clarity. For months I'd been working quietly on a prototype, an idea that could change the way small communities shared renewable energy. I'd started sketching it in my tiny apartment above a laundromat in San Diego, fueled by coffee exhaustion, and the belief that the world didn't need another Carter Fund, it needed something new. That night, soaked to the bone, I made myself a promise. I would never again show up to beg for a seat at their table. I would build my own, and when it was ready, they would hear my name, not through whispers of failure, but through the voice of someone they could never ignore. 3 years earlier, the Carter name had meant everything to me. We were a dynasty, or at least that's what my father liked to call us. My parents, William and Eleanor Carter, were the kind of couple that magazines called old money with modern polish. Dad ran a private investment firm. Mom chaired 3 charity boards. My brother Lucas, 3 years older, had always been the golden child, the straight-A student, the rising executive, the living proof that our father's teachings worked. And me, I was the experiment that failed. Growing up, the dinner table was a classroom. Every night, Dad drilled us on the principles of wealth. Money is a tool, he'd say, tapping his fork against the plate like a metronome. And tools belong to those who know how to build. Lucas learned to build profit. I learned to build ideas. That difference was enough to exile me. At 15, I coded my first software, a simple app that helped small groceries manage their inventory. Lucas laughed when I showed him. "Cute," he said, "but you can't scale feelings." I didn't argue. I just watched him walk away, memorizing the tone he used. Because one day I'd use it too, but not on him. Now, standing under that Boston rain, I realized something powerful. My revenge didn't need to be loud. It needed to be undeniable. I went back to my rented apartment that night, 2 rooms stacked above a bakery where the smell of yeast filled the air even at midnight. I opened my laptop, wiped water off the keyboard, and pulled up my prototype again, Helionova. It wasn't much yet, just a design for a decentralized energy grid that allowed households to trade excess solar power directly with each other. But it was elegant, lean, and alive with possibility. As the rain drummed harder against the window, I whispered to the empty room, "If you want to get rich, Emma, stop thinking like a poor person." Dad had said it as a warning. I said it as a vow. By the time the sun rose, the storm had passed. The streets glistened with puddles, and the city looked newly washed, as if ready for a second chance. I packed the leftover cake into a Tupperware, slung my worn leather bag over my shoulder, and headed for the train station. One day, I thought the Carter family will celebrate another birthday. And when they do, the person they called the failure will be the reason their lights are still on. I didn't know it then, but that night, the night I wasn't invited, was the moment everything began. The first lesson my father ever taught me about money didn't come from a classroom or a boardroom. It came from a small silver coin. I was 10 when he placed it in my palm, a worn Kennedy $50 shining softly under the kitchen light. "Real value doesn't fade," he said. "When bad money floods the system, good money hides. Remember that, Emma. Don't ever become bad money." At 10, I didn't know what he meant. At 32, I finally understood. The morning after the birthday humiliation, I boarded a flight from Boston to San Diego with that same coin in my jacket pocket. It was smooth from years of handling its edges dulled by time. It wasn't worth much to anyone else, but to me, it had become a compass. The plane's engines roared as the city I'd grown up in disappeared beneath the clouds. For the first time in years, I felt light, unanchored from the expectations that had kept me grounded in someone else's version of success. When I landed, the California air felt different, warmer, freer, scented with salt and dust, instead of money and polish. My apartment sat above a small bakery in North Park, and the landlord, a widow named Mrs. Perez, kept the hallways smelling like cinnamon. I unpacked the essentials: a second-hand laptop, a notebook filled with sketches, and a framed photo of me and Dad from when I was 8, both of us smiling in front of a lemonade stand. He was holding the same silver coin. The caption, written in Mom's neat cursive, read, "Her first profit." That night, I spread my designs across the kitchen table, diagrams of solar panels, battery circuits, and microgrids, and began mapping out my idea. Helionova, a decentralized energy system that allowed homes to share solar power without corporate interference. To anyone else, it looked like another startup fantasy. To me, it was redemption disguised as innovation. Days became weeks. My mornings were for freelance coding gigs that barely covered rent. My nights were for building Helionova. I lived on coffee, determination, and the kind of hunger that no amount of family approval could feed. I learned to solder wires, write clean code, and read patent filings until my eyes burned. Sometimes I'd catch myself whispering quietly, "Don't become bad money." The phrase became a mantra. It reminded me that shortcuts were expensive, and that building something real meant bleeding for it. One evening, while debugging a line of code that refused to cooperate, I burned my finger on a soldering iron. The pain was sharp, immediate, and strangely satisfying. The burn left a small blister, a mark of progress. It was the opposite of the cold, polished perfection I'd grown up with. Back in Boston, Lucas was probably sipping vintage scotch at a charity gala. Dad would be discussing market forecasts with men who believed risk was only for the poor. And I burned, exhausted, underpaid, had never felt richer. The first major breakthrough came 2 months later. A local energy conference was being held downtown, and I submitted Helionova's prototype to the startup showcase under a fake name, E. Carter sounded too familiar, too dangerous. I registered as Emma Hale, borrowing my mother's maiden name. When I arrived, the conference center buzzed with optimism and desperation, the twin fuels of Silicon Valley's lesser cousins. Booths lined the halls filled with people selling dreams on PowerPoint slides. I had nothing but a working prototype and a heartbeat that wouldn't slow down. When it was my turn, I connected the system to a pair of miniature panels and powered a single light bulb. The judges watched in polite silence. One of them, a man in his 50s with sharp eyes and a Helionova pin on his lapel, asked, "So it trades energy peer-to-peer?" "Yes," I said. "No middlemen, no centralized control. Real people own the grid." He studied me for a moment, then smiled. "You might be onto something." He handed me his card. Richard Hale, CEO of Helionova Energy Systems. That night, sitting in my tiny kitchen with my silver coin beside the card, I couldn't tell if it was fate or irony. The name Helionova had been mine, but the company existed too. A bigger one, a real one. I almost tore the card up, but then I remembered Dad's voice again. When bad money floods the system, good money hides. Maybe I didn't need to compete. Maybe I needed to infiltrate. The next morning, I walked into Helionova's glass-walled office building with my resume in hand and a lie ready on my tongue. Junior developer position, I told the receptionist. Emma Hale. I submitted my application online. A week later, I got the job. The work was unglamorous, debugging, testing user interfaces, cleaning up other people's code. But I soaked it all in. Every late-night meeting, every product roadmap, every whisper about upcoming patents. I wasn't stealing secrets. I was learning the language of systems I would someday disrupt. Richard Hale noticed me early on. He wasn't like my father. His suits were wrinkled, his office cluttered, but his mind was razor-sharp. One evening, he called me into a meeting unexpectedly. "Emma," he said, leaning back in his chair, "you see patterns no one else does. Ever thought of moving beyond code?" "I think about a lot of things," I replied. He chuckled. "That's the right answer?" As I left his office, I caught sight of the company's mission statement engraved on the wall. Power belongs to those who create it. It made me smile. For the first time in years, I wasn't begging for belonging. I was creating it. Months passed. I saved every paycheck investing in small components for my side project. Helionova was my classroom, and my real company, the one I'd someday build again under my own name, was my after-hours degree. But success, like electricity, has resistance. The night before Christmas, a team dinner was held at a downtown restaurant. The usual toasts were made: growth, innovation, profit. When it was over, Richard raised his glass one last time. "To those who see the future," he said. His eyes met mine for a fraction of a second. I went home with the silver coin warm in my pocket, the burn mark on my finger fading into a pale scar. Boston had rejected me. California had refined me. And somewhere between the silver and the fire, I was becoming something new, something dangerous. It started with a system crash at 2:17 a.m. The entire network at Helionova froze, lines of code cascading like a digital waterfall, error messages flashing red across my monitor. The office was empty except for me, the hum of the servers echoing in the silence. Most employees had gone home hours ago, but I'd stayed behind chasing a bug that refused to die. For weeks, the internal grid module, the heart of the company's new energy trading platform, had been malfunctioning. It was supposed to connect households, directly allowing them to sell and share solar power seamlessly. But something deeper was wrong, something the other engineers hadn't noticed. I leaned back, rubbed my eyes, and whispered to no one, "Show me what you're hiding." When I traced the data flow, I found a loop, one that redirected excess power not to customers, but to a private offshore server. Someone had built a back door. Someone was siphoning energy credits, skimming profit from every user transaction. It wasn't a glitch. It was theft. I copied the code into a private folder, encrypted it, and shut the system down. My heart was pounding. If this got out, Helionova would collapse overnight. The irony stung. A company built on the promise of shared power was secretly stealing it. For a long moment, I stared at the glowing cursor. My father's voice drifted back again. When bad money floods the system, good money hides. So this was bad money hidden behind good branding. The next morning, I went to see Richard Hale. His office overlooked the bay, the sunlight reflecting off the water like 1,000 small truths. He was pouring coffee when I walked in. "Emma," he said without looking up, "you're here early. There's something you should see." I laid the printed code on his desk, the lines highlighted in yellow. He read silently for a full minute. Then he leaned back, exhaling through his nose. "Who else knows about this?" "No one," I said. "Not yet." He nodded slowly. "Good. Don't tell anyone else." "Richard, I began this could destroy the company. It's a fraud." He gave me a look that was both tired and sharp. "Emma, in business, perfection doesn't exist. We course correct as we grow. That's how we survive." I stared at him, realizing the truth. "You knew." He didn't answer. For a moment, I felt the same nausea I'd felt the day my brother called me the failure, the same suffocating mix of anger and disbelief. "I joined this company because I believed in the mission," I said, my voice shaking. "You said power belongs to those who create it." "It still does," Richard replied softly. "You just haven't learned how power really works." I walked out before I said something I couldn't take back. Outside, the California sky was a perfect, merciless blue. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. The coin in my pocket felt heavier than usual, pressing against my thigh like a question I couldn't answer. Was this the game, a fight not for real value, but for who could control the narrative of it? For days I wrestled with it. The easy choice was to quit, walk away, start over. But quitting meant silence, and silence meant complicity. Instead, I began to build again quietly in the shadows of my apartment. Not Helionova's system, but mine. The original idea. Clean, transparent, unbreakable. I called it Lumos Grid. It wasn't just a name. It was a rebellion in code form, a system that recorded every transaction publicly using blockchain verification to prevent manipulation. No backdoors, no secrets. The people owned the light. Every night after work, I coded until sunrise. Coffee cups piled up beside my keyboard like trophies of defiance. The burn on my finger had faded, but another had replaced it, an invisible one deep beneath the skin. Weeks turned into months. Progress was slow but relentless. And then came the call. Emma Carter. The voice on the other end was clipped professional. "This is Gregory Vaughn from VentureX Capital. I saw your paper on decentralized grid models. I'd like to discuss funding." I froze. "How did you find my work?" "It's making its way through the underground forums," he said. "You're challenging Helionova's monopoly." "That's bold." We met the next day in a cafe near the marina. Gregory was in his 40s, calm and calculating. He didn't talk like a typical investor. He asked about purpose, not profit. "What's the endgame, Ms. Carter?" he asked, stirring his coffee. "Freedom," I said simply. "Energy belongs to everyone." He smiled. "That's what they all say until they realize freedom doesn't pay rent." But an hour later, he slid a folder across the table. Inside was a contract, $500,000 in seed funding. Enough to turn Lumos Grid from an idea into a company. "Think carefully," he warned. "Helionova won't like competition. And the energy sector has long memories." I signed before he finished the sentence. That night, standing on the pier, I looked out over the dark waves. The silver coin caught the moonlight in my hand. I whispered, "Bad money floods the system, good money hides." Then I flipped the coin into the air, catching it just before it could hit the water. "No," I said aloud, my voice carried by the wind. "Not this time. Good money fights back." The next morning, I quit Helionova. Richard Hale didn't even look surprised. "I figured this was coming," he said. "Wherever you're going, Emma, just remember, idealists burn bright, but they burn out fast." I smiled. "Maybe. But at least we light something before we do." When I walked out of that glass building for the last time, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel scared. I felt like electricity itself, uncontainable, alive, ready to strike. Within a week, Lumos Grid had a name, a plan, and a team of 3: me, a hacker named Theo, and a solar engineer from San Jose named Iris. We worked out of a rented garage just like every mythic startup before us. But ours wasn't about disruption for profit. It was about revenge through creation. Every line of code was a rebellion. Every late night was a silent war cry. One evening, as thunder rolled over the bay and the rain hammered the roof, Iris looked up from her monitor. "Have you ever thought about showing them?" she asked. "Your family. Hale. Everyone who doubted you." I stared at the storm outside. "Not yet," I said. "They'll know when the lights go out." The power flickered for a moment, and all 3 of us froze. Then, as if the world itself was listening, the lights steadied again. Theo grinned. "Guess even the storm knows who's in charge now." I smiled back, the silver coin cool against my skin. The storm outside raged on. But inside that small garage, something stronger had started to glow. Not fire, not fury, but power, quiet, clean, and completely mine. The first time I saw my father's name again, it wasn't on a family text thread, it was on a press release. Carter Capital announces strategic partnership with Helionova Energy Systems. The article glowed on my laptop screen as if it had been written just to test me. My father's firm, the one that had turned down my every idea, was now funding the same company I had walked away from. Helionova. I read the paragraph twice, my chest tightening with each word. The partnership was described as a multi-million-dollar investment to accelerate clean energy solutions. Richard Hale's quote was smooth as glass. "We're honored to join forces with Carter Capital, true visionaries in building the future of sustainable wealth." And below it, my father's face. "Innovation must serve both people and profit," he said, smiling at his politician's smile. That's the difference between a dreamer and a builder. I slammed the laptop shut. That single sentence, the difference between a dreamer and a builder, had been his mantra since my childhood. It was the same thing he'd told me when I dropped out of Harvard, the same phrase Lucas had thrown in my face at Dad's birthday. I wasn't a builder. I was a dreamer, a failure. Except now their innovation was the one I had helped design, corrupted by greed and stamped with a Carter seal of approval. Theo found me an hour later, still staring at the closed laptop. "You okay?" he asked, holding a can of cold brew. I didn't look up. "They're using my work. My family's funding it." Theo sat across from me, his sneakers squeaking on the concrete floor. "Then take it back." How I snapped. "They own everything, the patents, the PR, the power." He shrugged. "Then we'll just build something better. Faster. Smarter. Isn't that what you do?" He was right. That's what I did. The next morning, I doubled our working hours. Iris handled prototype testing, Theo rebuilt the network security layer, and I rewrote the entire Lumos architecture from scratch. I didn't sleep for 48 hours. I didn't eat anything that wasn't from a vending machine. But every keystroke felt like a strike back at them. By the end of the week, we had a working demo. Lumos Grid 2.0 wasn't just cleaner, it was alive. The platform could detect and correct energy theft in real time, redirecting excess power to where it was needed most. No backdoors, no hidden loops, no Carter fingerprints. When we tested it across 3 neighborhoods in San Diego, something incredible happened. Power bills dropped by 23% in a single month. People started calling it the People's Grid. We'd become local legends without meaning to. The news spread through online forums, and soon small investors reached out, retired engineers, eco-activists, even a billionaire philanthropist who wanted to remain anonymous. By spring, Lumos Grid had funding, a name in the media, and a growing user base. That's when Richard Hale called. "Emma," he said when I picked up, his tone warm but dangerous. "I hear you're building something ambitious." I leaned against the counter, the silver coin cool between my fingers. "You mean something honest?" He chuckled. Honesty doesn't scale, my dear. But congratulations. You've made an impression. What do you want Richard to offer you an opportunity, he said smoothly. Helionova wants to acquire Lumos Grid. Full buyout 25 million. You'll get a team resources and the chance to make your system global. I laughed a short, bitter sound. So you can bury it, or rebrand it with a Carter logo. Don't be naive, he said. You can't win this fight alone. You've built something impressive, but you don't have the infrastructure or the capital to compete. Take the deal. Be smart. Smart, I said quietly. My father taught me what smart means to men like you. It means control. I hung up before he could answer. For hours the garage was silent except for the low hum of the servers. Theo watched me from across the room. You're not actually thinking about taking it, right? No, I said. I'm thinking about what happens when they realize they can't buy me. The answer came within a week. Anonymous reports circulated online accusing Lumos Grid of data manipulation and security breaches. Investors panicked and funding froze overnight. A targeted hack hit one of our servers, and Theo traced the IP back to an address in Cambridge, the same city where Carter Capital's offices were headquartered. It was a clear, sharp warning. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a call from him. The name William Carter flashed on the screen for the first time in years. Emma, he said, his voice calm, deliberate. I understand you've built something impressive, but you're playing with fire. I learned from the best, I replied. This isn't a game, he said. You're standing in front of a machine that's been running for decades. It doesn't stop for anyone, not even you. Then maybe it's time someone pulled the plug. He sighed, the sound heavy with disappointment. You're still thinking like a poor person. Always fighting, always trying to prove a point. Wealth isn't about rebellion, Emma. It's about endurance. That's funny, I said. Because every time I think of you, I don't see endurance. I see fear. Fear of losing control. There was a pause. Then his tone hardened. You think you're building something pure, but purity doesn't survive in business. You'll understand that when this collapses. I hope you're ready to live with the consequences. The line went dead. I stood there for a long time, the weight of the silver coin in my hand grounding me. He wanted me to think like Carter. He wanted me to play safe, protect the illusion of wealth instead of building real value. But I wasn't a Carter anymore. I was Lumos. That night I gathered the team. They're trying to crush us, I said. So we give them something they can't control. Theo frowned. You mean release the grid publicly? Exactly, I said. Make it open source. Anyone anywhere can build their own Lumos network. No investors, no gatekeepers, no Carter signatures. It was reckless. It was bold. It was everything my father warned me not to be. The next morning we released the code. By sunset, it had gone viral. Developers across the world began adapting at rural towns in Texas villages in India, solar farms in Africa. Power was being traded freely instantly. No corporation could stop it. Lumos had become unstoppable. And for the first time I realized revenge didn't always need destruction. Sometimes it was creation that burned brightest. As night fell, the city lights flickered on one by one, each glowing bulb a quiet act of rebellion. I looked out the window and whispered to myself, Your machine doesn't stop for anyone, Dad. Then watch how fast mine spreads. The silver coin gleamed in my palm, catching the reflection of the light I had built myself. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, sealed in gold and embossed with the Carter crest, a lion clutching a key. I didn't need to open it to know what it was. My family never wrote letters. They sent summons. Inside the invitation read, William and Eleanor Carter. Cordially invite you to celebrate the 65th birthday of William Carter, Saturday 7 p.m. at the Carter Estate, Beacon Hill, Boston. Below in my brother's handwriting was a note. It would mean a lot if you came, Emma. It's been too long. Lucas. I stared at the card until the ink blurred. The paper was thick, the tone unmistakable, elegant, polished, and absolutely certain that I would come crawling back. Theo found me that afternoon, still holding it. What's that? An invitation to the kingdom I was exiled from, I said flatly. He smirked. You're not actually going right. I haven't decided. He leaned closer. You do realize this screams setup, right? Your dad's tied to Helionova. Your brother's the loyal prince. It's not a dinner, it's a show. Maybe it's time for them to see who I've become, I said quietly. Theo studied me. If you go on your terms. That night I poured a glass of wine and reread the invitation. The heavy gold embossed seal felt cold beneath my finger. Once I thought its weight represented security. Now it just felt like a lethal, quiet pressure. Dad's voice echoed in my head. When you walk into a room, Emma, walk like you own the place, or don't walk in at all. Maybe it was time to finally take his advice. The week before the dinner, I buried myself in work. Lumos was spreading faster than I could track, rural communities were going off-grid, students were coding new extensions, and online people were calling it the light revolution. The open source release had made me both famous and invisible. Everyone knew Lumos, but no one knew me. That anonymity had been my armor. But tonight, I was ready to take it off. I booked a flight to Boston, stayed in a harbor hotel, and chose a gray dress, elegant, quiet, the kind of strength that didn't need to shout. At 6:45 p.m., the cab dropped me at the Carter estate. The mansion looked unchanged, white columns, glowing windows, a flag rippling like a signature. But something inside me had shifted. This time I wasn't the daughter begging to belong. I was the storm they'd refused to see coming. Lucas opened the door, smiling his perfect Carter smile. Emma, he said, genuinely surprised. You came. Don't sound so shocked. He hesitated, then hugged me. You look different. I am different. The house smelled like lemon polish and nostalgia. Champagne laughter floated through the air. Every chandelier sparkled as if nothing had ever cracked beneath it. Mom approached first, warm and careful. Emma, she said softly, kissing my cheek. I'm glad you decided to come. I'm not sure I did, I murmured. She smiled faintly. Your father's in the study. He'll join soon. Of course he would. The king always waited for his stage. I wandered through the hall past portraits of generations of Carters, each face wearing the same trained composure. Then I saw a framed photo of Dad and Lucas at a Helionova press event. Building the future, the caption read. My stomach turned. Emma Carter, a voice said behind me. I turned. A woman stood there, tall, poised, wearing a sapphire dress. I've heard so much about you, and you are Claire, she said, extending her hand. Lucas's fiancée. Of course, she smiled brightly. I work in energy consulting. Helionova's one of our biggest clients. The name hit like ice water. Helionova, I said evenly. She nodded. They're doing incredible work, peer-to-peer energy trading, decentralized grids. Her voice blurred for a second as my pulse quickened. My code. My vision. Claire's eyes shone with admiration. Their new network is brilliant. We just started implementing it. I forced a smile. Yes, it is brilliant. Then the dining room doors opened, and the murmurs quieted. My father entered, William Carter in his immaculate gray suit, every step practiced authority. The guests rose, glasses raised. Good evening, he said. Thank you for joining me tonight. He looked directly at me, his smile thin. Even the prodigal daughter returns home eventually. Laughter rippled through the table. I met his gaze and said, only when the house needs rebuilding. The laughter died as quickly as it started. Dinner unfolded in polite conversation, but tension sat at the table like a 13th guest. When the servers cleared the plates, Dad lifted his glass. To my family, he said. To legacy. To the builders who move the world forward. He looked at me pointedly. And to the dreamers who remind us why we do it. I set my glass down. Some dreamers build too. They just don't ask permission first. The room stilled. Lucas whispered, Emma, don't. But before I could answer, the door to the dining room opened. A tall man stepped inside, shaking rain from his coat. Apologies for the delay, he said, voice deep and calm. Richard Hale Helionova. The name rippled through the guests like a current. My father stood instantly, face brightening. Richard, we were just discussing your company's incredible progress. Richard's eyes swept the table and stopped. Wait, he said slowly. You're Emma. The silence was absolute. Even my mother froze. I met his gaze. We've met. Dad's face went pale. Lucas blinked, realizing too late what that meant. Richard straightened. Then I suppose the secret's out, he said lightly. Emma's the one who built your system's foundation. Helionova exists because of her early architecture. I assumed you all knew. My father's hand tightened around his glass. That's an exaggeration, he said. Richard smiled politely. Is it? The air turned heavy. I didn't need to say another word, the truth had just spoken for itself. I stood. You've spent years pretending I didn't exist. Now you'll have to face what I've built. My father's voice was low, dangerous. You've embarrassed yourself enough. No, I said. I've reminded you what integrity looks like. The room held its breath. Then I turned, walking toward the door, my heels echoing against stone tile. Behind me, the whispers began, first confusion, then awe, then fear. At the doorway, I looked back once. You once told me to stop thinking like a poor person, I said softly. Maybe it's time you stopped thinking like a coward. And then I left. Outside, the Boston night was cold and alive. The streetlights flickered, reflecting off the rain-soaked pavement. I exhaled the breath, leaving me like a promise. They could keep their table. I had just claimed the room. The night air bit through my coat as I walked down Beacon Street. Behind me, the Carter mansion glowed like a stage after the curtain fell, voices still echoing, glasses still clinking, pretending nothing had cracked. But something had. Something that could never be put back together again. My phone buzzed. Theo's name flashed on the screen. Well, he said as soon as I picked up. How bad was it? I let out a short laugh. Define bad. Please tell me you didn't start a food fight. Worse, I said. The CEO of Helionova walked in and told the entire room that I built their system. There was silence on the line. Then, holy shit. Yeah, I whispered. The truth finally walked into the wrong dinner. For a few blocks, neither of us spoke. I could still feel the weight of every stare from that table. The shock, the disbelief, the dawning realization that the family's golden empire was built on someone else's light. Mine. Theo broke the silence. You know they won't just let this slide, right, Carter? Capital Helionova. They'll spin it. Make you look like the villain. I know, I said. That's why I'm done hiding. When I reached the hotel, I kicked off my heels, still shaking with adrenaline. On the desk, I opened my laptop and started typing notes code fragments of memory. Not just defense, but evidence. For years, I'd let their silence define me. Tonight, their silence had turned into proof. An hour later, I hit record on my webcam. The screen glowed against the darkness. My name is Emma Carter, I said. And this is the truth. I spoke for 10 minutes, calm, precise, surgical. I explained how I'd built the original decentralized energy framework, how it had been lifted and rebranded, how the same men who called me a failure were now profiting from my work. No anger, no tears, just facts. When I finished, I uploaded the video to the Lumos site's community channel and shut the laptop. By morning, it would spread like electricity. At dawn, Boston woke to headlines that felt like tremors. Carter family dinner erupts in corporate controversy. Helionova CEO confirms stolen grid design. The daughter they called the failure built the future. Theo called before I'd even had coffee. You're trending on every platform, he said. Half the energy sector just realized their hero is a 32-year-old woman who codes in hoodies, and the other half scrambling to deny it. I smiled faintly. Good. Let them chase shadows. But I knew this wasn't victory. This was ignition. And once the truth ignites, it doesn't burn clean, it consumes. By noon, my inbox overflowed with messages, reporters, investors, old professors, people I hadn't spoken to since Harvard. Even Mom's name appeared in the unread list. Please call me. Your father is furious. I didn't reply. Fury was a language I no longer spoke. Instead, I opened Lumos Grid's analytics. Traffic had tripled overnight. Downloads spiked in Asia, Europe, Africa, everywhere. People were tired of being dependent. The light was spreading faster than their lies. Then my phone rang again, an unknown number. Emma Carter. The voice was smooth corporate. "Who's asking Gregory Vaughn, VentureX Capital?" "We met once in San Diego." I remembered him, the investor who'd warned me that freedom doesn't pay rent. "What do you want, Gregory?" He paused. "A front row seat to whatever war you're about to start." I laughed softly. "This isn't a war. It's a correction." That afternoon, I walked along the harbor, the same cold wind slicing across the water. Boston looked beautiful from a distance, clean, historic, full of ghosts pretending to be tradition. I thought of Dad still sitting in his study, probably drafting the press release that would turn this into my fault. And I thought of Richard Hale, the man who'd unknowingly pulled the trigger for me. A message from him buzzed in my inbox. "Emma, we need to talk. Privately. No press, no lawyers." I replied with one line, "You already said everything that needed to be said." By sunset, Lumos Grid's homepage was crashing under the weight of new users. Theo burst into my room, breathless. "Emma, you have to see this." He turned his laptop toward me. A live stream, hundreds of people across the world connecting small solar grids, shouting for Lumos into their phone cameras. The movement had become unstoppable. And yet a small part of me still trembled, not from fear, but from the quiet realization that the world was finally seeing me. Not as a Carter, not as a failure, as the architect of her own light. That night I stood by the window, watching snow begin to fall over the harbor. The city lights shimmered through it, each flake catching gold like code fragments in the dark. My phone buzzed again, this time a single message from my father. It wasn't an apology. Of course not. Just 6 words. "You don't know what you've started." I stared at the screen until the message blurred, then typed back, "Yes, I do. It's called the truth." Then I powered off the phone. Outside, somewhere across the city, the Carter estate still glowed against the night. But this time, I didn't see it as home. I saw it as history. And history, I realized, is only power when no one dares to rewrite it. I opened my laptop again, not to check metrics or headlines, but to begin something new. Not Lumos 2.0. Something cleaner. A system no one could twist or corrupt. As I typed, the silver coin on the desk caught the light from the window. I picked it up, feeling its cool weight against my skin. Dad had once told me that good money hides when bad money floods the system. But maybe he'd been wrong all along. Good money doesn't hide. It shines until the system can't ignore it anymore. At midnight, I sent one message to Theo. "Get ready. We're going global." He replied with a single emoji. I smiled, closed the laptop, and whispered to the empty room, "Happy birthday, Dad." The storm had started at his table, but the light was mine. By morning, the storm had a name, mine. Every major outlet carried the story, "Carter heiress exposes corporate theft. Helionova's golden empire, built on stolen code." The daughter, they called a failure, just lit up the world. The headlines didn't feel like victory. They felt like shockwaves, fast, uncontrollable, impossible to stop once released. I sat by the hotel window, coffee gone cold, watching snow smear across the Boston skyline. The city looked clean, like someone had scrubbed it too hard. Theo called at sunrise. "Your video hit 10 million views overnight," he said. "You're trending in 17 countries." "Good," I said. "Let them see what they built from lies." "Emma, listen," his tone shifted. "Carter Capital's already moving. Legal team's PR. They're calling it slander." I laughed softly. "Of course they are. Truth always sounds like slander to the guilty." By noon, the machine had turned. Press releases, denials, counterclaims. Helionova's board issued a statement calling my accusations emotional distortions from a disgruntled ex-employee. Carter Capital echoed the sentiment, accusing me of misappropriating proprietary data. They'd gone from thieves to victims in a single paragraph. Then came the subpoena. A thick envelope slid under my hotel door that evening. William Carter versus Emma Carter, Helionova Energy Systems versus Lumos Grid Technologies. It wasn't just retaliation, it was a declaration of war. Theo arrived breathless, a laptop under his arm. They're suing for intellectual property theft, defamation, breach of fiduciary duty, the whole arsenal. I stared at the papers. They think they can bury me in paperwork. That's what they do best, he said quietly. Then let's show them what I do best. What's that shine? The next day we flew back to San Diego. Reporters swarmed the airport like hungry gulls. I kept my head down, the silver coin warm in my pocket. Dad had taught me to play power games. Now I was playing one he couldn't control. At Lumos headquarters, the team was already in crisis mode. Screens flashed with live news, legal briefings, and emails from terrified investors. Iris looked up from her monitor. They froze our funding accounts. Theo swore under his breath. They're suffocating us financially. Then we go where money doesn't rule, I said. I pulled up the Lumos mainframe. We open everything. Every blueprint, every protocol, every data stream, free and public. They can't kill what everyone owns. Theo blinked. You're serious? Completely. They wanted to take it from me. Let's see how they handle not being able to take it from anyone. By dawn, Lumos Grid was open source again, every file mirrored across hundreds of servers worldwide. Within hours, developers began replicating and improving the system. Someone in Kenya launched a subnetwork. A university in Norway uploaded modifications for cold climates. An engineer in Brazil adapted it for wind power. The movement had outgrown me. And that's when fear hit, not for myself, but for what I'd unleashed. Power once freed never asks for permission again. That evening my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered before thinking. Emma Carter. Yes, this is Richard Hale. His voice was colder than the Boston wind. You've made a mess. I corrected one. You don't understand. You exposed everything: investors, partners, international contracts. You didn't just burn me, you burned the grid. You built the grid on lies. And now everyone will lose, he said. Not just your father's empire. Jobs, pensions, clean energy projects. Collateral damage, Emma. Congratulations. He hung up before I could answer. For a moment I stood still, staring at the dead phone line. Collateral damage. The phrase lingered like smoke. Was that what the truth cost, maybe? But silence had cost more. By the end of the week, Lumos was everywhere, and so were the consequences. Carter Capital's stock dropped 30%. Helionova suspended operations. The government opened an ethics investigation. Reporters dug up old Carter investments tied to offshore accounts. Every secret my family buried was crawling into daylight. And yet, instead of relief, I felt the ache of something hollow. Victory didn't sound like triumph. It sounded like a collapse. Theo found me in the lab, hunched over the servers. You haven't slept in 3 days, he said. I can't, I admitted. Every time I close my eyes, I see what's coming next. What's that? The backlash. He leaned against the counter. You wanted revenge. You got it. I looked up at him. No, Theo. Revenge was never the goal. It was proof. And now I have it, but at a price I didn't see coming. That night I received one final message from my father. A single sentence. Meet me. No lawyers, no cameras. The pier at midnight. I went. The harbor was quiet, the water black and cold. He stood there alone, coat collar turned up against the wind. For the first time he looked smaller, not the titan of Carter Capital, but a man watching his own kingdom sink. You've done what no one else could, he said as I approached. You broke the machine. I didn't break it, I replied. It was already broken. I just stopped pretending. He nodded slowly. You think the truth is enough to rebuild it? It's the only place to start. He looked out at the water, the city lights reflected in his eyes. You were right about me. I taught you to think like the rich, not like the good. And now you've beaten me with both. I didn't answer. The silence between us felt heavier than any argument. After a long moment, he said, "The lawsuits will continue. They have to. The board's furious. But off the record, Emma, what I'm proud of you." The words hit harder than any threat he'd ever made. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to win. I just felt seen. When I returned to the office, Theo was asleep on the couch, code still running on his laptop. I sat beside him watching the lines of light crawl across the screen. Power wasn't something you took. It was something you carried carefully, painfully, until it changed shape. And maybe that was the real price of power. Not the enemies, not the lawsuits, the understanding that once you hold it in your hands, you can never be the same again. I picked up the silver coin from my pocket, its surface reflecting the monitor's glow. Dad used to say good money hides when bad money floods the system. Maybe he was wrong about that too. Good money doesn't hide. It learns to stand in the open, bruised bare, unafraid. And that's exactly what I plan to do. The courthouse smelled of stone dust and history, like every secret ever whispered in power suits had settled into the stone. Reporters crowded the steps, cameras flashing as I climbed them. I didn't flinch. The flashbulbs were nothing compared to the glare I'd lived under my whole life. Inside the courtroom was cold and cathedral quiet. My father sat at the plaintiff's table, silver hair, immaculate expression, unreadable. Across from him, I took my seat beside Theo and my attorney, a soft-spoken woman named Kara Liu, who looked more like a poet than a shark. That, of course, was her greatest weapon. The judge entered. Carter Capital vs. Lumos Grid Technologies is now in session. And just like that, family became litigation. The first day was numbers and noise. Helionova's counsel paraded charts, graphs, accusations. They painted me as reckless, a rogue engineer who stole proprietary data in a fit of ego. My father's lawyer repeated one phrase like scripture. Ambition without accountability is chaos. Each time he said it, I felt the weight of his eyes on me, not the lawyer's, but my father's. Calm, controlled, calculating whether I'd crack. When our turn came, Kara rose, slowly adjusted her glasses, and said, "Ambition without accountability is chaos," which is precisely why Ms. Carter chose transparency. Then she clicked the remote. The screen behind us lit up with code, thousands of lines time-stamped, dated years before Helionova's existence. Each line bore my digital signature. Kara's voice never lifted. Every empire leaves fingerprints. The difference is whether they admit whose hand built it. The room murmured. The judge leaned forward. My father's lawyer objected. Overruled. For the first time, my father's composure slipped. A muscle in his jaw, twitched, barely visible, but enough. Day 2 was cross-examination. Ms. Carter, the opposing counsel, began. "Is it true you used Carter Capital funds to support your early prototypes?" "No," I said. "I used my savings, freelance income, and a loan I repaid in full." He smiled thinly. "So your family name was simply convenient." "It was a burden," I said, and the courtroom rippled with quiet laughter. He shifted tactics. "You released Lumos as open source, correct?" "Yes." "Then by your own admission, you forfeited ownership." I met his eyes. "You can't steal what belongs to everyone." Silence again. Even the judge's pen paused mid-note. By the end of the week, the narrative had shifted. Reporters stopped calling me the disgruntled daughter and started calling me the whistleblower. The world loves a new archetype more than the truth itself. On the 4th morning, as I walked through the corridor lined with cameras, someone stepped out of the crowd. Claire. She looked exhausted but steady. "They subpoenaed me," she said. "I'm testifying tomorrow." "You don't have to," I told her. "Yes, I do. I helped hide the data transfer logs. I'm not hiding anymore." Her voice trembled, but her eyes didn't. I nodded once. "Then tell them everything." Her testimony detonated the trial. She described late-night meetings between Helionova executives and Carter Capital auditors, how they'd funneled my prototype into corporate systems and wiped the metadata. Every word was a crack in the granite walls my father had built. When it ended, he wouldn't look at me. For the first time, he looked small. That night I sat in my hotel room alone. The city hummed outside, cold and merciless. Theo knocked once and let himself in. "You did it," he said softly. "It's not over." He shook his head. "It's over for them. Now it's about what comes after." I stared at the window's reflection, the same girl who'd once carried a homemade cake to her father's birthday now staring back like a stranger forged from lightning. "What comes after?" I whispered. "Maybe peace. Maybe purpose. I'm not sure I can tell the difference anymore." The verdict came on a gray Tuesday. The judge's voice was measured, deliberate. The court finds in favor of the defendant Lumos Grid Technologies. The plaintiff's claims are dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, evidence indicates willful misappropriation by Helio Nova Energy Systems. The matter will be referred for federal investigation. Gasps rippled through the room. Kara squeezed my hand once hard. I turned to my father. His expression didn't change, but his eyes did. Pride, pain, surrender all flickered there for a heartbeat. He stood slowly, straightened his jacket, and walked out without a word. Outside, the steps of the courthouse were blinding under the camera lights. Microphones pushed toward me, questions flying. How does it feel to win? What will you do next? Do you have a message for your father? I took a breath, feeling the cold bite my lungs. I didn't come here to win, I said. I came here to end a lie. The rest is just noise. The microphones lowered, unsure what to do with an answer that didn't fit their headline. That evening I walked to the harbor again, the same pier where my father and I had last spoken. The water was calm now, moonlight scattered across its surface like data lines. Theo joined me, 2 coffees in hand. "It's done," he said. "You can rest." "Rest?" I smiled faintly. "We just proved transparency works. That's not an ending, that's a prototype." He raised his cup. "To prototypes, then." "To light," I said. We stood in silence. The city reflected in the black water, each window a fragment of everything we'd fought for. Behind us, the courthouse clock struck midnight 12, clean notes echoing over the bay. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of my father's words again, but they no longer belonged to him. If you want to get rich, stop thinking like a poor person. He had meant money. I finally understood he'd been wrong. It was never about money. It was about courage. And courage, like light, only matters when you give it away. Boston had never been so quiet. For weeks, the city had been a battlefield of cameras, headlines, and opinions. Now, after the verdict, it just stopped. The silence was almost eerie, like the city itself was waiting to see what would happen next. I stayed in a small rented apartment near the harbor, away from the Carter estate, away from Lumos headquarters. For the first time in years, no one needed a statement from me. No interviews, no courtroom, no fight. And that's what scared me most. Victory was supposed to feel like freedom. Instead, it felt like space too wide, too still, too easy to get lost in. The newspapers called it the Carter collapse. Helio Nova's board had resigned. Carter Capital was selling off divisions to pay fines. My father's name was now shorthand for what every business school called the danger of inherited arrogance. They wrote about him the way people write about extinct empires, half pity, half awe. And me, they called me the daughter who burned her dynasty to build light. I wasn't sure if that was praise or a warning. Theo came by sometimes, trying to pull me back into the world. "You realize you're the face of the clean energy revolution now," he said one morning, dropping 2 cups of coffee on my counter. "You can't just hide." "I'm not hiding," I said. "I'm recalibrating." He smirked. "You sound like a computer." "Machines crash when they run too long," I said. "Humans just call it burnout." He looked at me carefully. "You lost a father, Emma. Don't pretend you didn't." I didn't answer, because he was right. The courtroom had ended the war, but it hadn't healed the wound. One night I took a walk through Beacon Hill. The air was sharp, laced with winter salt and memory. When I passed my parents' street, I slowed, staring at the mansion at the end of the block. The lights were off, curtains drawn. For the first time, it looked like what it had always been, a beautiful cage. I didn't go in. but I left something on the gate, the silver coin. It wasn't an act of forgiveness. It was a full stop. Back in San Diego, the Lumos office felt alive again. Iris was running a team in Nairobi. Theo was onboarding developers across Asia, and messages flooded in from around the world. Villages, schools, towns that now had power because of Lumos. The system had become more than a company. It was a movement, and yet I felt like an observer to my own creation. One afternoon, a video call popped up unexpectedly. Claire. Her face appeared on screen, tired but bright. "You vanished," she said. "I needed quiet," I replied. "Quiet doesn't suit you. Maybe it should." She laughed softly. "You know, when I testified, I thought I was destroying my career. But Lumos hired me last month. We're expanding to South America." "Good," I said, and meant it. "You deserve to build something real." "So do you," she said. "Don't forget that." When the call ended, I sat for a long time staring at the Lumos logo glowing on the screen. It wasn't just mine anymore, and that was the point. Maybe real victory was letting go. A week later, an email arrived from an address I hadn't seen in months, wcarter@cartercapital.com, the subject line, "Dinner. No press. Just family." I read it 3 times before I could breathe. There was no threat. No demand. Just a location, a time, and a single sentence beneath it: "If you're still willing to build, I'm ready to learn." For a moment, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Maybe both. That Saturday I went. The house looked smaller now, stripped of its arrogance. My mother opened the door herself. No servants, no photographers. The smell of baked bread and coffee drifted out, a human smell. In the dining room, Dad stood by the table, thinner, older, but no less deliberate. He looked up when I entered, and for the first time he didn't wear his armor. "Emma," he said softly. "Dad." He gestured to the seat across from him. "I thought we might start again." I sat. There were no speeches, no apologies. Just 2 people eating in the quiet hum of reconciliation. At one point, he reached into his pocket and placed something on the table, a gold watch worn at the edges. "I used to think this measured success," he said. "Now I know it just measures time. And I've wasted too much of it." I swallowed hard. "It's not too late." He smiled faintly. "You sound like your mother." We talked about small things after that. Old neighbors, my brother, the weather. But under it all, there was a new current. Not the old battle of pride, but something slower, softer. Acceptance. When I left that night, snow had started falling again. It reminded me of the first night I'd been banned from his birthday, how cold the air had felt, how small I'd been. Now, walking down the same street, I realized I wasn't small anymore. I looked up at the dark sky snow catching the streetlights like static electricity. The city glowed not because of legacy or empire, but because people everywhere were learning to make their own light. Back home, I stood by the window of my apartment watching the Pacific fade into dawn. I opened my journal, the one I'd started years ago when Lumos was just an idea, scribbled between coffee stains, and wrote a single line: "Revenge built the fire. Truth carried the flame. But love, that's what kept it burning." Then I closed the book. The storm was over, but the light remained. The months that followed didn't feel like an ending. They felt like sunrise. For the first time in my life, I wasn't fighting against something, I was building toward it. The world had stopped calling me the Carter scandal and started calling me the Lumos founder. It was a strange shift, like watching your own reflection blur and reform into someone steadier. But I knew one truth: that no headline ever caught survival isn't the end of the story. Legacy is. Lumos had become a living organism, breathing, growing, transforming. Developers across 40 countries were building on the open source platform. Small towns were powering clinics and schools. Farmers were running irrigation systems without waiting for government funding or corporate permission. Theo called it the democratization of energy. I called it freedom. We'd long outgrown the label of a tech company. Lumos had become a philosophy that light shouldn't be owned, it should be shared. Still, the bigger it grew, the more I felt the weight of the question my father once loved to ask: what's the long-term value of what you're building? Back then it was a taunt. Now it was a compass. One evening I found myself walking along the harbor again, the same pier where everything had begun. The confrontation, the silence, the apology. The air smelled like salt and clean metal, the city lights flickering across the black water. That's when I realized Lumos didn't need another expansion. It needed a soul. The next morning I called Theo. "We're creating a foundation," I said. He blinked. "What now?" "The Lumos Foundation. A non-profit branch. It'll take all the profits from our open-source licenses and funnel them directly into global education and microenergy startups, especially those led by women." He grinned. "That's brilliant." "It's inevitable," I said. "You can't hold light forever. It's meant to move." A week later, I met with my father again, this time, not in the house where I'd grown up, but in a small office he'd rented in Cambridge. There were no gold pens, no heavy portraits of ancestors, just papers, a laptop, and an old dark wood desk. He stood when I entered. "I saw the news. The Lumos Foundation." "Yes." "You're giving it away, not giving," I said. "Releasing. Letting it flow." He nodded slowly, eyes thoughtful. "You know your mother said something similar once, that wealth only has meaning when it circulates." I smiled faintly. She was right. He leaned back in his chair, studying me. "When I taught you to think like a rich person, I thought I was teaching strength." "I was wrong." "No," I said softly. "You just stopped too soon. You taught me how to think like a rich person. Life taught me how to think like a whole one." He laughed, not bitterly this time, but with something close to pride. "You've become everything I never understood. Maybe you just didn't have the right teacher." He raised an eyebrow. "And who was that?" "The fire," I said simply. "It burned everything false away." The Lumos Foundation launched in early spring. We held the first press conference in San Francisco on the rooftop of the new Lumos building, solar panels glinting in the morning light. The crowd was filled with journalists, activists, and students. But in the front row, sitting quietly beside Theo, was my father. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't use a script. I started Lumos because I wanted to prove something I began. To my family, to myself, maybe even to the world. But proving something and building something are two different things. Proving comes from pain. Building comes from love. Lumos isn't about me anymore. It's about us, about how we choose to use what we know, what we have, and who we are to bring light where there was none. The applause came slow, then thunderous, but all I heard was my father's quiet clap, steady, deliberate, proud. After the ceremony, I found him standing by the edge of the roof watching the city skyline. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked. "The power." "Every day," I admitted. "But I don't crave it anymore." He nodded, turning the gold watch around his wrist. "You know, I bought this when gold was $50 an ounce. I thought it was an investment. Turns out it was just a mirror." "For what?" "For who I was back then." He took it off, pressed it into my hand. "Keep it. Not as an heirloom, as a reminder." I turned it over, heavy, beautiful, gleaming in the sun. "What reminder? That wealth isn't about what you own," he said. "It's about what you hold: integrity, courage, vision. And you've held all three better than I ever did." I looked at him for a long moment, the wind tugging at our hair, the city humming below. "Maybe forgiveness wasn't something you gave once. Maybe it was something you practiced like breathing." Later that night, Theo found me in the office, sitting with the watch on my desk and the Lumos coin beside it. 2 generations of currency, one gold, one silver, both glinting under the same light. He leaned against the doorframe. "You look peaceful." "That's new." "Maybe it's the absence of noise," I said. "Or maybe it's legacy." I smiled. Legacy used to mean inheritance. Now it just means impact. He crossed the room and placed a folder in front of me. "New project proposal. Africa-Asia hybrid grid. They're calling it the Emma Network." I laughed. "They can call it whatever they want, as long as the lights stay on." He hesitated. "You ever think about what's next for you?" "Always," I said, looking out at the city. "But for once, I'm not running toward it. I'm letting it come." As dawn broke, I stepped onto the balcony, the Pacific shimmering below. I held up the gold watch, my father's symbol of power, and the silver coin, my symbol of truth. Two forms of wealth, two legacies, one inherited, one earned. I slipped them both into my pocket. They belong together now. Because real wealth isn't passed down, it's passed forward. And as the first sunlight caught the city's rooftops, I realized something simple, something profound. Revenge ends when power changes hands. Legacy begins when light changes hearts. And the world finally was full of light. The first time I saw it, I didn't believe it was real. A drone video sent by a field engineer in Nepal. Dozens of children ran across a dusty hillside, their laughter echoing as the camera panned upward. Behind them, a grid of silver panels shimmered under the mountain sun. Each home in the valley, each fragile handmade roof now glowed with electricity for the first time. The caption beneath the footage read, "Powered by Lumos. Built by us." I played it 3 times before I remembered to breathe. This was what it had all been for, not the courtroom, not the headlines, not the redemption arcs. Just this, a handful of children running beneath the light. Theo found me still watching it hours later. "Pretty wild, huh?" he said, setting down 2 cups of coffee. "They did this themselves?" I asked. He nodded. "We just sent the starter kits. They figured out the rest. The Foundation's training videos are spreading faster than TikTok." I laughed softly. Finally, a viral trend that matters. But with growth came noise. With light came the shadows. By midsummer, Lumos networks were running in 58 countries. Governments wanted partnerships. Corporations wanted licensing deals. Even banks, ironically the same ones that once refused to fund me, now wanted to sponsor Lumos-certified projects. And that was when the first email came. It was from Echelon Energy, a multinational conglomerate I knew too well. They offered $3.4 billion for exclusive control of Lumos's global infrastructure. "Your vision deserves scale," the letter said. "And scale requires ownership." I stared at the screen, feeling the old temptations stir, the same hunger my father used to warn me about. Ownership. Control. Power disguised as progress. Theo, of course, had already read it. "You're not actually considering it, right?" "No," I said. "But I want to know how they think." "They think like Carter's used to," he said. "Monopolize the sun." I smiled faintly. "Then let's remind them it doesn't belong to them." 3 days later, I was on a flight to Geneva to speak at the World Energy Summit. It was the kind of event my father used to live for: silk suits, high-stakes panels, private dinners that decided the future behind closed doors. But I wasn't there to dine. I was there to disrupt. When I walked onto the stage, the hall was silent. Rows of polished executives stared, waiting for me to announce Lumos's next strategic partnership. Instead, I said, "We're not here to sell light. We're here to share it." Then I clicked the screen behind me. A map appeared. Dots of light, thousands of them spreading like stars across the globe. "This," I said, "is what happens when you stop protecting ownership and start protecting possibility. This isn't a product. It's a pulse. And it's bigger than all of us." There was no applause at first, just stunned quiet. Then slowly it rose, soft, steady, unstoppable. Afterward in the corridor, a woman stopped me. Her name was Dr. Amara Singh, an engineer from India. "I worked in Helionova before they went under," she said. "I used to build systems that locked people out. Now I build ones that let them in. Because of you." I smiled, shaking my head. "Because of us." And that was the first ripple I truly felt, not the news, not the politics, but the quiet shift in a single person's purpose. But every ripple meets resistance. A month later, I woke to headlines that felt like déjà vu. Private firm accused of cloning Lumos network for profit. Screenshots flooded the web. Corporate installations branded as Lumo Light charging communities monthly for something meant to be free. Theo stormed into my office. "They copied your code." "Our code," I corrected. He threw his hands up. "They're charging farmers for sunlight, Emma. It's Helionova 2.0. I leaned back thinking, maybe that's exactly why this happened. What does that even mean? Every system evolves. Every revolution gets commodified eventually. The question isn't how to stop them, it's how to stay ahead. Theo frowned. You sound like your dad again. Maybe I said. But this time, I know what he missed. Power's only dangerous when it's centralized. That night, I drafted a proposal. The next morning, the Lumos Foundation released a global update Project Mirror. It was a decentralized verification protocol that could detect any Lumos clone worldwide and automatically open its network to the public. If you tried to sell the light, it would simply spread faster. Within 72 hours, Lumolite servers crashed. Their patents expired in digital smoke. The internet called it poetic justice. I called it evolution. A week later, I got a call from Boston. It was my father. I saw what you did, he said quietly. Project Mirror. You taught me to protect what I build. I said. I taught you to protect it for yourself, he corrected. You protected it for the world. I smiled. Guess we both evolved. He chuckled softly. You know, Emma, there's something strange about watching your child fix what you broke. It hurts, but it heals too. That's what light does, I said. It burns, then it shows the way. By autumn, Lumos had become a verb. To Lumos meant to light, to share, to empower. Artists painted murals of solar grids across cities. Students wrote songs. A group of activists in Brazil carried banners that read, "We are the grid." And sometimes late at night, I would sit on the rooftop of our headquarters and think about how far a single defiant act could travel. A cake outside a locked birthday party. A silver coin. A vow whispered to an empty room. Now all of it was echoing across continents. Theo joined me one evening, handing me a small tablet. New data just came in, he said. Global access increased by 38% this year. That's 1.2 billion people using Lumos directly or through mirrors. I stared at the screen, the numbers glowing like constellations. He grinned. That's not just a ripple anymore, Emma. That's a tide. When he left, I stood alone, the city below a sea of light. I pulled the gold watch from my pocket, the one my father had given back, and turned it over in my hand. The ticking was faint beneath the hum of the servers. For the first time, I didn't think of time as loss or pressure. I thought of it as rhythm, continuity, flow. Somewhere out there, someone was flipping a switch for the first time. A child seeing light where there'd only been darkness. A family charging a phone, reading at night, dreaming again. That was the real ripple. And as the wind moved across the rooftop, carrying the scent of rain and electricity, I whispered to the city, "This is what legacy sounds like." It wasn't silence. It was light traveling endlessly outward. The sky over Boston was the color of old silver, soft and reflective. It had been 1 year since the trial, 6 months since the launch of Lumos Foundation, and 3 weeks since my father called and said almost shyly, "Come home. Dinner, no press, just family." When I arrived at this Carter estate, it no longer looked like a fortress. The iron gate stood open. The manicured hedges were a little overgrown, and the light spilling from the windows was warm, not staged, not performative. Mom opened the door herself. "You made it," she said, pulling me into a hug that felt real this time. In the dining room, Dad was setting the table. No servants, no formal china, just simple plates, a roast chicken, and my old favorite homemade apple pie. "You cooked?" I asked, half teasing. He smiled. "Your mother supervised. I followed orders for once." It was the first dinner in years that didn't feel like a performance. Lucas and Claire were there, too quieter now, softer around the edges. Claire reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "I'm working with Lumos Africa," she said. "They're starting new networks in Ghana." "That's incredible," I said, genuinely moved. "You're helping light up half the world." She smiled. "You started it." Dad cleared his throat, his voice low but steady. "Actually, she rebuilt it. All of it." The words hung in the air, an admission, but also something more. After dinner, Mom and Claire washed dishes while Lucas took calls in the living room. Dad motioned for me to follow him into the study. The same old room, dark wood shelves, faint smell of tobacco, but something had changed. The trophies and awards were gone. The walls were bare except for one framed photograph our family years ago before everything fell apart. He poured 2 glasses of bourbon and handed one to me. "You're not going to lecture me about my habits?" he asked. I smirked. "Not tonight." He studied me over the rim of his glass. "You've done something remarkable, Emma. Lumos. It's not just a company anymore. It's a symbol. The kind of thing men like me spend lifetimes trying to build and fail." I looked at him carefully. "You didn't fail, Dad. You just built the wrong kind of empire." He nodded slowly. "You're right. I built walls to protect what I thought mattered. You built bridges to share it. That's the difference between ownership and leadership." I said nothing, letting the silence stretch. For the first time, it wasn't uncomfortable. He turned toward the window. "You remember what I used to tell you about rich and poor people? If you want to get rich, stop thinking like a poor person," I said automatically. He chuckled softly. "Back then I thought it meant buying gold, owning land, and controlling everything. Now I realize it's about something else entirely. Poor thinking is fear. Rich thinking is trust." He looked at me again, eyes clearer than I'd seen in years. "You stopped thinking like a poor person long before I did." The air in the room felt heavy, but not with regret, more like release. "Dad," I said quietly, "you don't have to keep fighting. You can still be part of this. Lumos isn't about erasing what you built. It's about evolving it." He smiled faintly. "You want to hire your old man as an intern?" "I was thinking of a senior advisor," I said. "Pro bono." He laughed, a deep, genuine sound that filled the room. "I'll take it." We clinked glasses. The sound was small but powerful, the sound of years finally breaking open. Later, as I was leaving, he handed me something small, a silver coin. The same one I'd kept since I was a teenager, the one he'd once used to teach me about good money. "I found this in your old desk drawer," he said. "I think it's time it came full circle." I turned it over in my palm. "You used to say good money hides when bad money floods the system." He nodded. "But maybe good money doesn't hide. Maybe it transforms." Outside, the snow had started to fall, soft, slow, unhurried. I walked to my car. The coin warm in my hand, my heart strangely light. 3 months later, Lumos launched its newest initiative, Project Horizon, a satellite-powered network providing real-time energy access to remote regions. Dad watched the live stream beside me at the headquarters, surrounded by engineers, interns, and volunteers. When the countdown ended and the rocket vanished into the blue, he whispered, "I finally understand, Emma. You didn't just build technology. You built a philosophy." I smiled. "And you helped write the first line." The room erupted in cheers, but all I could hear was the faint echo of his old words transformed, reborn. "If you want to get rich, stop thinking like a poor person. Not about money, about possibility, about believing there's enough light for everyone." That night I stood on the rooftop with Theo, watching the city pulse with electricity, every window a small declaration of resilience. "Have you ever thought about how far you've come?" he asked. "All the time," I said. "But it's not how far I've come. It's how far we've all gone together." He grinned. "So what now, Carter?" I looked out at the skyline, at the flicker of light reflected in the ocean below. Now I stop fighting to prove I belong and start helping others realize they already do. When I went home, I found a message waiting from Dad. "You were right. Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's who you bring with you." I smiled through tears. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like his shadow. I felt like his continuation. And as the city glowed beneath me, I whispered to the night, revenge was never the ending. It was the spark. The real ending was this 2 generations finally standing in the same light,